you just got yourself a camera and never had one before, or just thinking about getting one soon, this video is for you. It's not gonna be super information heavy, but I'll give you a few of the camera basics that I was figuring out myself all the time that I was in a video production. So let's get started. What I really want to focus in this video is how to regulate the image in your camera, how to make it look one way or the other. Let's say you want a darker, brighter, colder, warmer, smoother background. That's kind of what I want to teach you in this video. And I'm gonna use Sony camera as an example, but they all work pretty much the same. The biggest thing that will have effect on how the image look like is the exposure triangle. Aperture, shutter speed, ISO. All three of those things regulate how bright or dark the image gets. But if all of them have the same purpose, why just not regulate one and leave two others alone? Well, if only it could be that easy. Aperture dictates how wide or narrow the lens opens. And if you look at the lens right here, I'm changing the aperture, it goes wider now, and it goes more narrow now. The wider you open your lens, the more light it's gonna get, so the brighter the image gonna be. Additionally, the lower the aperture, the smoother the background gonna be. So as you see, the background is literally blurred behind me right now. And that's because I'm using the low aperture on my lens. If I'm gonna start increasing the aperture, the lens is gonna get narrower, so it's gonna get less light, the image gets darker, and you see the background behind me is not blurred at all. As I increase the aperture, the background gets blurrier, it gets more light, and basically the image looks better. Different lenses have different apertures. This lens is Sigma 1.4, and 1.4 is pretty much the lowest you can get. I mean, you can get lower, but those are different types of lenses. 1.4 means you're really gonna have the smooth background and a good performance in a low light situations. The lens I'm filming on right now, however, it's 17 to 70mm lens, so you can increase or decrease the zoom, but it's only fixed 2.8 aperture, meaning it can't go below 2.8, so it's gonna be a little worse in a low light situations just because it can't open that wide. Second thing in our exposure triangle is shutter speed, and shutter speed dictates how fast the shutter will close. The rule of thumb when it comes to video, shutter speed should be double your frame rate. Basically, if you're shooting 30 FPS, we're gonna talk about it in a second, your shutter speed should be 1/60. Or a few of the newer cameras introduce something that's called shutter angle. And shutter angle, when it comes to rule of thumb, will be equal to 180 degrees, meaning double the frame rate. The faster the shutter speed, the darker the image gonna start getting. So you don't really want to touch your shutter speed. Just leave it double your frame rates and you're gonna be good. Unless you want to try to get this creative, jittery look, then you need to lower your shutter speed to like 1/10 or even lower, and that's how you get it. But usually, just leave it double your frame rate. The last thing in our exposure triangle is ISO. And ISO is basically digital increase of the brightness or darkness on the image. Basically, here's me increasing the ISO on the camera and decreasing the ISO on the camera. Best thing, if you just leave your ISO at 100. You can go kinda all the way to 500, but if you go over 500, it might introduce some static noise on your image, and you kinda want to avoid that. So I would recommend to stay between 100 and 500 and regulate other settings like aperture to make your image brighter or darker. Quick break. Let me show you the difference between shot and a story. So here's pretty nice crowded market moment, but it clearly misses something. What if we add some vlog music to it? How about some people chatter sound effect?
Now, you are really telling the story.
Music, sound effects, voiceover is extremely important in pretty much every project. And my favorite platform when it comes to that is Artlist. Just the variety of the stuff they have. Music, sound effects, footage, voiceover. Like, this is everything you need to create a cool story. If you want to check them out, there's the first link in the description. And if you're gonna proceed with the annual plan, this link will give you 2 months free. Check it out and let's get back to the video. Second thing we want to talk about is frames per second. There's kinda only 3 main settings. 24 frames per second, 30 frames per second, and 60 frames per second. And if you don't know how the video works, it's basically images that your camera takes all the time and then puts them together, they kind of play together, and it's a video. So 24 frames per second, within 1 second, your camera gonna take 24 still images and put them together. Now, where do you use which setting? 24 frames per second I usually use in movies. It kind of has that look of natural motion to it. 30 frames per second is kind of the standard for social media. You can see less blur when I wave my hand, for example, and it means your camera is taking 30 still images within a second, so a little bit more than previously. And that's kind of what's being used on social media. But when you're shooting sports or something active, you want to choose 60 frames per second, because your camera can take 60 frames within 1 second. And because athletes are moving all the time, something is changing all the time, it's always better to have those additional frames. And later in post-production, you can also slow it down to 30 frames per second and you're gonna have so-called slow motion. And the last thing I want to talk about in this video, number 3, is white balance. Basically, what white balance does, it makes the image colder or warmer. When you're shooting outside and it's a sunny, bright day, Usually the white balance should be around 5500 Kelvin. This image, for example, is way colder. It's winter outside, so the snow is all white. My key light over there is set to like kind of lower Kelvin to make this image colder, and that's kind of the look that I was wanted to go for. But what if I want to change the white balance on my light? Check it out. The image just got way warmer right now, as you can see. Or I can make it way colder, everything is so blue. Or everything is so yellow. I'm just regulating a white balance on my light right now, but you can do the same within the camera, so you can make the image warmer or colder. Usually, you want to match the environment. If you are shooting the sunny day outside, you don't want to set your settings too low for the Kelvin temperature, you want it to be around 5500 to kind of match the environment and make the image look natural. And you can also correct some stuff in the post-production to make the image colder or warmer to your liking. Well, there you have it. These were just few of the camera basics on how you can regulate the image to your camera. Obviously, there's so much more to it, it will require practice and you watching few of the other videos. The person I can't recommend enough is Peter McKinnon. He actually has a series of 3 videos where he talks about camera basics. Basically the same stuff we talk about now, but more in depth, and he has more knowledge than I do, so I would recommend you to watch him. Otherwise, make sure to subscribe to this channel for more video tips and tricks, and I'll see you in the next one.